Hi everyone, welcome. I'm about to go check in on a couple systems that we've not seen any activity out of in a week. Usually we don't come in that frequently. A week is not much of an elapsed period between feedings, but in the case of these systems are now undergoing migration. And it did seem to me like perhaps 1 week after that had started, it might be a good idea to at least take a peek in here and make sure things are looking good. The way we set this up was that we set up a fresh area on the edge of the bins under the plastic here with bedding, food, and things like that. And then we left fairly flimsy covers here with only newspaper, allowing the side furthest from us to just start to dry, possibly become a space that the worms might not want to remain in, possibly, motivating them to get on the move and then find themselves over in the collection area. So I'm going to get these systems up on the bench, slip on a glove, and see how the European nightcrawlers are progressing with their migration. So let's get to work. Let's try to think how to play this, perhaps just individually checking each system separate from the other. Just a big pile of springtails collecting here as sort of a cleanup crew. Doing away with that demised worm right there. And the stuff on the surface here, by being covered only by newspaper, is pretty dry. That's the whole idea on this side of the bin being uncovered to a certain point, or at least covered with flimsy material, is that the material is going to begin drying, and then the worms will find themselves interested in finding themselves a place where there's more moisture. And then that was kind of the whole key behind setting up their feeding zone underneath the plastic, was to create a nice moist place and then even keep the moisture locked in with plastic coverings to not allow evaporation to dry the stuff that's over there. And I got to admit that I probably could have been a little bit more diligent and possibly popped in here once or twice over the past week to just do a little bit of what you see me doing here, which is to aerate and to till up the material in the hopes that perhaps by doing so will help with drying. That edge closest to the feeding zone has a good many worms in it, and a lot of times when I'm running a system like this, a horizontal migration to try to get the worms to exit their castings voluntarily, I'll really go to extra efforts to make this material on the edge that I'm tilling through now nice and dry, and then that prompts them to exit all on their own. And hopefully this tilling is going to help with drying a little bit. I am contemplating the idea of possibly even picking up the speed on this drying by leaving the newspaper off. That would definitely be an option too. But it does seem to me like at least doing what we're doing here, which is blending in some of the material that was on the surface, the dry stuff, down into the more damp material, and then by doing so leaving little air pockets and air cavities throughout, we're probably helping with the drying to some degree. And as far as bin number 1 goes, I think we're good to go. Material feels really nice. A little bit was kind of sticking to my glove, making me wonder, hey, did we just hit a little patch that was overly damp? Well, hopefully by tilling and aerating and blending in dry material, we start to see a little bit of improvement on that. But before we finish here in bin number 1, why don't we complete the thought of our check-in by uncovering the feeding area, which frankly, I didn't even really remember how it was set up. I could see springtails out here on the newspaper making themselves at home, and I also unfortunately see the carcass of a dead worm with a little bit of mold growing on it, but I'm curious to see if what we did for them over here created any interest. Do we see at least any worms collecting? I could feel them, and I could feel the moisture of the material down there, but number 1 observation and feedback is that it probably could be even more moist. But by being nice and moist down there, Here too, a good many springtails hanging out in it. But over here too, I can feel worms down in the material. And I see some leftover cantaloupe melon rind with a good bit of the melon still on this piece, at least. And I think if we were to probe around with the intent of finding more leftovers, we might find some, but I really didn't have like much in store for them as far as a feeding today, although I did figure I would come prepared with my worm chow that we could sprinkle a little bit of in here and kind of replenish the supply of food stuff. I've also got my prepared bedding right behind me, which we can sprinkle a little bit of in here as well. But it does seem to me like we're getting a pretty nice turnout. A good many worms have already kind of stumbled on this and appear to have liked it well enough to stick around and stay. So I think we'll slightly dampen the stuff that's in here already. It felt pretty nice, but some of the stuff that I plowed through was a bit drier, so it did seem to me like complementing the existing moisture in here with a little bit more would probably be a good idea. And I didn't want to go overboard. To me it seemed like what we just sprinkled in there as far as worm chow should be sufficient as well. And here too, same thing with the bedding. I don't think it's terribly important to go overboard. I just figured as long as we're in here anyway, let's replenish that as well. Certainly can't hurt, but it does seem like perhaps 2 handfuls would be a nice quantity. You might have also noticed I kind of did it very subtly, but I did appear to pull the cardboard back my way a bit in the hopes of actually increasing the size of the feeding area. I don't think I got far with that, but I did actually give it a try, and it just seemed like I didn't want to risk damaging the cardboard divider by using it as a plow to pull things in. I think the size is okay, so I think we'll stick with what we've got. I like what we're seeing here. Perhaps just a little bit more moisture. So I think our check-in on bin number 2 might go a little bit more quickly, so it'll be a little bit less of the unknown. We can kind of go in there with a fair expectation of what we're going to find, which is probably very similar to what we found over here. And as far as drying goes, you know, I'm not in a particular hurry, so I think by sticking with what we had here, the newspaper helping to cover things over near the section of the bin that we want to see the worms on, in the hopes that they stumble on and end up over in the collection area, the feeding zone, the horizontal migration feeding zone, and keeping this side nearest me uncovered is a-okay, because this stuff, let it dry, because we definitely want to see worm activity and movement going in the direction of the horizontal migration feeding zone. So let's do a quick carbon copy of what we did before, but before we mess that up at its most basic level, let's not forget we wanted to just quickly aerate and inspect the finished castings to see how they're progressing in terms of worm depopulation. I think, like we saw in bin number 1, there's going to be a good many worms still hanging out down here in this stuff. And all I'm really interested in doing is submerging the dry material I'm finding on the surface and till up everything else. So let's get that going here. This material is quite nice, and I'm also at the same time trying to gauge dampness, and a lot of times just material sticking to my glove is a measure of something being perhaps a little bit more damp than it needs to be. So these aerations and tilling up sessions, I think, do add a great deal to these migrations. I started actually doing it a little bit more as a routine in a couple of my more recent efforts to not migrate the worms per se, because I'd already separated the worms from their castings in those instances, but in those instances I was doing what I refer to as baiting of stragglers in a batch of what I would like to consider to be harvested castings, but castings that I know full well still have a good many worms occupying them. So I would go in these systems, and the same as we're doing here, just aerating, and hopefully by blending in dry material off the surface, enabling all of the material to get drier a little bit more quickly than if we just left it to occur without any help. So that's a nice little aeration, if you ask me. Let's see how the migration zone is shaping up as far as wormies coming out to check it out and stay. So down here, once again, maybe the way to give the nudge is not only pushing, but pushing with the cushioning effect of the material that's there already, instead of me just pressing up on the fragile cardboard. But then let's explore down deep and see what we see. I see lots of springtails scattered all over the place, but there's also a good many worms in here. If this material were darker, the worms would be a little bit more clear to see, but these materials that the bedding is made up of, which is just like shredded paper and leaves and stuff like that, the worms definitely blend in nicely, but I can see a good many of them in here, that's for sure. So let's follow suit with what we did in the previous setup, because I kind of liked that idea of slightly expanding the horizontal migration feeding zone, supplementing the bedding, even adding a little bit of yummy worm chow as a boost to the food supply. And, well, I guess not much we could do about the springtails, although I'm not too worried about that. And just trying to get a little idea in my head. I wonder how much longer it's going to take for these worms to collect in such numbers that we would probably feel like we want to proceed with getting them out of here, because, you know, that's something I need to be prepared with. I need to be prepared with some newly built worm bins for these little guys to be moved into. So that's probably one of my to-dos at this point, is to start thinking about where I want these little wormies to be moved into and start getting those spaces ready for them. So let's see. I was kind of liking this idea of using the spray of this to dislodge some of the materials here on my glove that should probably remain in the system. And unfortunately, it's all very small particle size leafy matter that we've got over here. But I guess we're killing two birds with one stone, because the moisture I'm dropping in does probably help a lot with hydrating this bedding we just added. You know, you might have noticed it did kind of have a little bit of a moisture content to it right out of the box, but I think that adding a little bit of moisture to it can only help. So that's pretty much it. We're going to restore everything just the way we found it. And once the camera stops rolling, I could take care of some of the more mundane stuff, like putting these systems back up on the shelf and getting stuff cleaned up. But I'm not going to keep you around for that. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before I go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.